All right, well, so joining me is Senator Ted Cruz. Senator Cruz, thanks so much for taking the time. It's very cool that you're out in Los Angeles. And, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Ben. Great to be with you.
Well, so let me start by asking you about the Omnibus Package, because obviously that just passed. A lot of conservatives very unhappy about it. You voted against the Omnibus Package. Why did it pass? Whose fault is it? Where should we aim our pitchforks?
Look, the omnibus is a total mess. It's $1.3 trillion in spending. It grows the debt. It grows the deficit. It grows just about every part of the federal government. And it really is, it's a product of the swamp. The thing is 2,200 pages, and it was written in the dark of night. It was written by really four people, by Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Paul Ryan, and Nancy Pelosi. The other members of Congress, we didn't even get to see it until hours before we vote. So I can promise you there is not a senator alive who's read all 2,200 pages of it. I don't think any of the four supposed authors of it have read all 2,200 pages of it. And so the Democrats' price for agreeing to anything is grow government massively and not accomplish conservative principles. And unfortunately, an awful lot of Republicans in Washington rolled over and agreed with it.
So we were told that there was going to be regular order when Republicans got back into power. Who's the big obstacle here? Because it looks like the House is able to pass some of these bills through regular order, but it seems like everything stops dead in the Senate.
Well, look, in the Senate, we had no amendments on the bill. There were a number of us, Mike Lee and I were both pressing with, how about have it open for amendments? And our leadership says, no, that's not practical, it's not feasible, because we've cut a deal with Chuck Schumer. And if you have an amendment might take out one of Chuck Schumer's priorities, and then our deal's gone. The system is a corrupt practice. Now, I will say, I think there were some meaningful victories in things we were able to keep out of the omnibus. There was a big, hard push from a number of more moderate and liberal Republicans to have tens of billions of dollars of bailouts for insurance companies under Obamacare. I think that would have been a disaster. The idea that we're bailing out the insurance companies who are making record profits while not honoring our promise to repeal Obamacare, while not lowering premiums, reducing regulations, expanding choice, expanding freedom, I think that's nuts. And we had a big battle in the conference. I pressed very hard to keep the insurance company bailouts out of the bill, and we succeeded. We kept them out.
So, I mean, as a conservative, I've spent virtually my entire life being frustrated with the Republican Party because the Republican Party makes a bunch of promises about things they're going to do. We give them the House, we give them the Senate, we give them the presidency, and then very little of it gets done. And when it does get done, it tends to be done in these vast bills that are 1,000 pages long and always are a crap sandwich. Is the problem here that Republicans are promising more than they can deliver, or is the problem here that the crowd of conservatives were just not realistic about what is possible in a Senate with 51 votes and with, a couple of Republicans who are at best very dicey on serious conservative priorities? So is it an expectation problem or is it a promise problem?
So I actually think it's neither. I think the problem is our leadership is not focused on delivering on our promises and having a systematic plan to accomplish that. Look back at 2017. 2017, despite all of the political craziness, you and I are both aware of all the craziness in Washington. Despite that, we accomplished a remarkable amount. I think the four big priorities for 2017 were tax reform, regulatory reform, Obamacare, and judges. And as the year came to a close, we had big wins on all four. The tax bill was a huge win. Reg reform, we're seeing every agency, job-killing regulations pulled back and reduced. Obamacare is our biggest unfinished promise, but even that, we did repeal the individual mandate. I led the fight to include the individual mandate repeal and tax reform. We got that done. That's a big deal. And judges have been an unmitigated home run, both on the Supreme Court, the federal courts of appeals. In 2017, we confirmed 12 federal appellate judges. That's the most in the first year of a president's term in history.
Right.
All of those are big, big victories. Now, if you look at those, every one of those victories was done through legislative vehicles that only require 50 votes, that can't be filibustered. What I'm urging my colleagues to do is in 2018, let's demonstrate that same seriousness of purpose, and let's bring up and vote on major priorities. Let's bring up and vote on making the individual tax cuts permanent. Let's make the small business tax cuts permanent. Let's vote on a full repeal, or if not, major reform of Dodd-Frank to free up capital for small banks that go and turn to small businesses. Let's tackle Obamacare and rescind regulations that are driving up premiums and expand consumer freedom. All of those we can do if, and here's the critical if, we tee up vehicles that only require 50 votes. If we stay in the world of the omnibus where you need 60 votes, we're not getting 9 Democrats.
Right.
So there are procedural vehicles that take 50 votes. The two are reconciliation, which is how we passed the tax cut. It's how we passed the Obamacare individual mandate repeal. It's how we passed my amendment expanding College 529s, the biggest federal school choice legislation in history we passed last year. The other avenue I've suggested is using NAFTA renegotiation as a vehicle for regulatory reform, but both of those you can do with 50 votes and they can't be filibustered if our leadership is willing to focus on let's deliver on our promise.
So you've been beating this drum for a long time that Senate leadership has been unwell in its pursuit of these priorities. I mean, this is going all the way back to your Obamacare filibuster, quasi-filibuster back in 2013. And so the real question that arises from all of this is, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but is it time to replace Senator McConnell? Because obviously if the Senate Majority Leader is I think every conservative who's listening is saying, okay, well, we're with you on all these priorities, and we're hearing that we can do this. So who's stopping us? We know Chuck Schumer's against us. We know Democrats are against us. So if McConnell is the guy who's standing in the way, then what's the deal?
Look, I'm not going to get into right now sort of leadership politics and battles. What I do think is we need a Republican leader who is responsive to the will of the Republican conference, the will of the majority, and ultimately the will of the people who elected us. And I will say among Senate Republicans, there's a generational divide, a divide between what I call the young Turks and the old bulls. The young Turks I define as anyone really elected 2010 or later. And that's a little more than half our conference. It's a big chunk of the Republicans in the Senate. The young Turks, many of them are pushing for let's do more. There's a real frustration. Why are we not delivering on our promises? And I'll confess, I'm doing everything I can to encourage the young Turks. Come on, guys. We can actually stand up and deliver. We can have a real plan to win, not just a plan not to lose.
Right.
But a plan to get the kind of victories we got in 2017. You know, I was deeply enmeshed up to my eyeballs in all of those battles in 2017, especially the tax reform battle. That was a huge victory. Let's learn from our victories and let's do it again.
So I want to drill down on this for just one more second, and that is, when it comes to Senator McConnell, you keep saying leadership. I assume his argument here would be that he's got a fractious caucus, that there are 5 or 6 Republicans who are not willing to go along with the rest. You say 80% of the caucus wants to go along with you. That leaves 20% that isn't. When you have a 51 vote majority, all you need is 2 who don't like what you're doing in order to sink something. Do you think that that's a real concern, or do you think that that's being exaggerated a little bit by leadership as an excuse for doing nothing?
Look, I think that's a very real concern. I mean, we have 51 Republicans. There is a massive ideological gulf. It is hard to find an issue that Susan Collins and Rand Paul agree on. I mean, that's, the Democratic Party, they're unified. They are all the party of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They've all gone so far left. They can unify. Our party, there are big, big, big differences. That being said, there are a lot of propositions you can get 50 Republicans for. That's a lot of what, it's interesting. Some of the media commentators have been puzzled at Cruz as consensus maker. I mean, they sort of view that as a joke.
Yeah.
How could Cruz be a consensus maker? It's real simple. I believe in this stuff. I didn't run for office just because I wanted an office in Washington, D.C.
It's not that great, I'll be honest with you.
It is lousy. And you and I were talking about right before the show, look, I'm away from my kids every week. I mean, this hurts to be away from my daughters. There's only one reason to do it, and it's to make a difference in our country, to get conservative victories, to defend the principles we believe in. And so that focus, we've got to get focused on doing that job. And there are lots of things. Before I was in the Senate, I was a Supreme Court litigator. I've settled a lot of lawsuits. The way you settle a lawsuit, you sit down with opposing party, you sit down with the clients, the principals, and you say, all right, what do you want? What do you want? Okay, no one's going to get everything. Where's common ground? What do we all agree with? There are a lot of propositions. You can get 50 Republicans on board. Make the individual tax cuts permanent. There's a very simple, real victory. The week after the tax cut plan passed, Bernie Sanders went on one of the Sunday shows with Jake Tapper. And Tapper said, well, look, this tax cut cuts the taxes for virtually every middle-class taxpayer in America. Isn't that a good thing? And Bernie says, of course. The problem is it's not permanent.
I remember this. Yep.
And so I took that clip, I retweeted it to the world. I said, Bernie, I agree. And I've drafted legislation to make it permanent. Join me, we can get this done right now. Now, oddly enough, Bernie has been silent. It's been
you didn't
crickets.
offer him enough pudding. I mean, that's...
But, look, that's a proposition. We can get 50 Republicans on making the tax cuts permanent.
Mm-hmm.
We can get 50 Republicans, a lot of things on Obamacare, that we can get expanding health savings accounts. We can get 50 Republicans on that. Allowing people to use health savings accounts to pay for premiums. That lets you use pre-tax dollars. That reduces your effective premium rate 20 to 30% like that.
Mm-hmm.
We can get 50 Republicans on that.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm going to be teeing up in the coming weeks, I've been having these conversations with a lot of senators who agree with me. In the next couple of weeks when we get back in D.C., I'm planning to tee up to the whole conference and have a conversation. Listen, is it really the case that as a conference we're done, we don't have any ideas anymore, we don't want to accomplish anything? I don't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
If there are things we want to get done, and we've got potentially a narrow window of time, 9 months to get it done, then let's develop a systematic plan to accomplish those victories. That's what our leadership is doing right now, is going to Chuck Schumer and saying, Chuck, what do you want to get done? And let's have a plan to get that accomplished. That, I think, is idiotic, and it's why our base is so unhappy.
Okay, so final question for you. 2018, obviously, the polls don't look fantastic. It's going to be very, very important for conservatives to get out and do something about it. The question that I get a lot when I have folks like you, when I have senators on, is what are we supposed to do? Like the grassroots conservatives, what can they do? Because they sit around and they're really frustrated, and then that frustration bubbles to the top through Tea Parties or through Trump or through whatever it is, but then they feel constantly let down. So what can they do right now to help foster what you're talking about? What can they do other than sit around and grouse about it?
If you look at 2018, I think is going to be a turnout election. It's not a persuasion election. The Democrats agree with this, by the way. If you look at how the Democrats are behaving, they have decided that the set of swing voters, of voters who are going to show up and vote in November but haven't decided if they're Democrat or Republican, that's essentially a null set. That doesn't exist.
Yep.
So for the last 15 months, what we've seen is the demise of the moderate Democrat, where even the so-called moderate Democrats, the Joe Manchins, the Heidi Heitkamps, their voting records are identical or virtually identical to Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They're all tacking hard left. Their objective is simple: turn out the far left. And the far left, they're energized, they're angry, and they hate the president. It is their motivating force and rage. We're going to see in November record Democratic turnout. In all 50 states, it's going to shatter records. The question that will determine whether 2018 is a good election, where we win 3, 4, 5 Senate seats, we come back with a real functioning majority in the Senate, or whether we get blown out and have Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer as the leaders in Congress, is going to come entirely down to conservative turnout. The states that are up in 2018, there are more conservatives than liberals. If conservatives show up, we'll do well. My state in Texas, I'm up for re-election in Texas. We're facing Democrats who are energized. We just had earlier this month a Democratic primary where Democratic turnout was up 100%. 4 years ago, it was 500,000. This year, it was 1 million. Now, fortunately, we had 1.5 million Republicans come out, so we turned out conservatives, but we got to do that in November. Mm-hmm. I'm facing an opponent, Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who's running hard left. He's running on open borders. He's running on aggressive gun control. He's running on socialized medicine. He's running on raising taxes. And on the far left, they're raising money like crazy. My Democratic opponent is out raising me right now. And what happens every time the president says something, tweets something, thousands of Bernie Sanders leftists, their heads explode. Mm-hmm. And they go online and they give $50 or $100 to every Democrat they can find. So one of the things, the folks listening to you, look, the other side is energized and engaged. For my campaign, I'd encourage you to come to our website. It's tedcruz.org, tedcruz.org. Sign up, volunteer, speak out, contribute. We need the resources to mobilize conservatives. And then I'd encourage, one of the beauties of the modern age, of the social media age, is you don't have to be, Ben, you've got a show, you've got a media platform. Every one of your listeners has a platform also. Every one of your listeners can engage their friends, mobilize their friends, make them laugh, make them care. Every person listening to this show, I hope, number one, will contribute at tedcruz.org. But number two, we'll focus on energizing and turning out conservatives for November and simultaneously holding Republicans accountable in Washington. Guys, deliver on your promises. Get more conservative victories to give everyone a reason to come vote.
Well, Senator Cruz, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. It's always great to see you. And of course, we go all the way back to the David Dewhurst days. So it's good to see, obviously how prominent you've become, and we can only hope that you continue to be in a leadership position. Hopefully that grows over time. Thanks so much, Senator, for stopping by.
Thank you, Ben.